Some stories from the Bible feel ancient, but the human moments inside them feel surprisingly familiar. In this video, we will walk through one of the most unusual moments in David's life, the night he ran from a king who once trusted him and found refuge with a prophet. But before we step into that scene, think about this question for a moment. What do you do when the place that once celebrated you suddenly feels unsafe? When the environment that opened the door for you begins quietly trying to close it? The palace had already thrown a spear once. David knew it would not miss forever. Night had settled over Israel when David ran. The music that once celebrated him had turned into whispers of danger. The king who once welcomed him into the palace now watched him like an enemy. Every step inside Saul's court had become a calculation. Every hallway a place where the next moment might be the last. David understood something many warriors never learn. The most dangerous battlefield is not always outside the palace walls. Sometimes it grows inside the mind of a leader who feels threatened. Think about that for a moment. Have you ever walked into a workplace, a ministry, or a room where something shifted and you could feel it without anyone saying a word? One day people applaud your work, the next day the same success makes someone uncomfortable. No announcement, no explanation, just a quiet change in the air. That is where David found himself. So David ran, not toward soldiers and not toward the army that once celebrated his victories. He ran toward a prophet. The road from Saul's court to Ramah was not a victory march. It was a desperate escape. The same David who once walked proudly through Israel carrying Goliath's sword now moved through the night like a man who owned nothing. Behind him was the power of a throne, and ahead of him was a single hope: Samuel. Years earlier, the old prophet had visited Jesse's house and poured oil over the head of a shepherd boy no one expected to matter. At the time, David did not understand the weight of that moment. He returned to the fields, to sheep, to music, and to a quiet life. Now the meaning of that anointing began to unfold in ways he could never have predicted. Oil had touched his head long before David ever touched a sword. There is a lesson hidden there if you look closely. Many people want the position before they understand the process. David had already been chosen long before the palace ever noticed him. His promotion did not begin with applause in the streets. It began quietly in a house with a prophet and a horn of oil. When David reached Ramah, he found Samuel in the place where the prophet lived and taught among the community of prophets. David told him everything. He spoke about the songs that filled the streets after Goliath fell. He described how celebration turned into comparison and comparison turned into jealousy. He spoke about the spear that flew across the palace room, about the promotions that felt like traps, about the strange rewards Saul offered that always carried hidden danger. Samuel listened quietly as the story unfolded. The prophet had seen power shape men before. He had watched kings rise and he had watched kings fall. What David described did not surprise him. Power does not create fear inside a leader. It reveals fear that was already there. Saul once ruled with promise, but promise can rot when insecurity takes hold. The throne that once stabilized the kingdom had become the center of a growing storm. Let me ask you something. Have you ever seen someone change when they gained authority? Not always overnight, but slowly. A position turns into control. A title turns into insecurity. A leader begins protecting their image instead of protecting the people they lead. That tension is not new. It was already happening thousands of years ago. Back in the palace, Saul learned that David had fled. News traveled quickly through royal courts, and the name of the place David had chosen reached Saul almost immediately: Ramah, the city of Samuel. The prophet who once anointed Saul now sheltered the man everyone quietly believed might replace him. That thought alone was enough to turn suspicion into rage. Fear rarely reasons with truth. It moves faster than wisdom and louder than patience. Saul gave the command without hesitation. Men were sent to Ramah with a simple order: find David and bring him back. When the soldiers arrived at the place where Samuel and the prophets were gathered, they expected resistance. Instead, they encountered something they could not control. As they approached the gathering, the men who came to arrest David stopped. Their posture changed. Their voices changed. Instead of seizing David, they began to prophesy with the very prophets they had come to confront. Think about the irony in that moment. Men sent to silence a voice suddenly became part of the voice themselves. The authority of the king could not compete with what filled that place. Word returned to Saul that his men had failed. The report sounded absurd. Soldiers sent to capture one man had ended up speaking among the prophets. Saul assumed weakness, not divine intervention. So he sent another group of men determined that the command would be carried out the second time. The second group arrived with the same order and the same expectation. Yet the same outcome unfolded again. Instead of arresting David, they also began to prophesy. Whatever presence filled the gathering around Samuel dismantled every attempt to enforce Saul's command. Now pause for a moment and think about your own life. Have you ever watched a situation unfold where someone tried to control an outcome, yet every attempt kept falling apart? Sometimes people call that coincidence. Sometimes people call it luck. But there are moments when something larger is quietly redirecting the outcome. When Saul heard the second report, anger replaced disbelief. A king who senses power slipping through his hands often reacts the same way. If others cannot complete the task, he will do it himself. Saul left the palace and traveled toward Ramah, determined to confront the situation personally. This was no longer about one fugitive warrior. This was about the authority of a king who believed his throne was under threat. As Saul approached the gathering of prophets, the same force that overwhelmed his soldiers met him as well. The king who came to seize David found himself unable to control the moment unfolding around him. The influence that filled that place did not recognize royal commands or military authority. Saul himself began to prophesy among them, overcome by the same power that had halted every attempt to capture David. For hours, the king remained there, stripped of the control he hoped to demonstrate. The ruler who came to prove his authority found himself unable to exercise it. The soldiers who followed him watched their king experience the same overwhelming moment that had stopped them. In that place, the difference between king and soldier disappeared. David saw what happened. The men who came to capture him failed. The king who came to finish the job lost control of the situation entirely. David understood something in that moment that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He was not surviving because he ran faster than Saul. He survived because something larger than kings had stepped into the conflict. Now think about your own experiences again. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to block you, silence you, or remove you from a place where you once belonged? Maybe it happened at work. Maybe it happened in a ministry. Maybe it happened in a family. At the time, it felt personal. It felt unfair. It felt like someone else had all the power. But what if that moment was not only about opposition? What if it was also about direction? David left the palace that night thinking he had lost everything. Yet that escape began the journey that would shape the leader he would eventually become. The caves, the wilderness, the exile, the strange alliances, the difficult decisions, all of it was forming something inside him that the palace could never teach. There is wisdom hidden in that path. Sometimes the place that rejects you is also the place that releases you. Sometimes the position you lose is the position that would have kept you small. But David also understood another truth. This moment would not end the pursuit. Saul's fear had already grown beyond reason. Prophecy might interrupt the hunt for a moment, but it would not heal the insecurity driving the king's decisions. Saul had crossed a line inside his heart, and once fear becomes identity, it rarely retreats quietly. David would run again. The palace that once celebrated him would not welcome him back. The road ahead would lead into caves, wilderness, and exile. Yet the same road would also shape the leader Samuel saw long before Saul ever threw the first spear. The fugitive leaving Ramah that day was still running for his life, but the future king of Israel was already being formed. And sometimes the most important formation in a person's life begins the moment they are forced to leave the place where they once felt secure. If you enjoy Bible-based stories and the lessons we explore together here, consider subscribing to the channel. Save the video so you can revisit the message, share it with someone who might need it today, and if the story made you think, leave a comment and let us know what stood out to you. If it spoke to you in some way, show your support with a like. We truly appreciate your presence here.